is Sandy with Calvert Library, and welcome to another edition of It's Elementary. So today I'd like to share with you a really interesting book. This book is called The Wildest Race Ever. And the subtitle is The Story of the 1904 Olympic Marathon. Now, I don't know about you, but I love watching the Olympics. The Olympics only come on every 2 years now, right? They switch between Summer Olympics and Winter Olympics. So the Summer Olympics only happen every 4 years, but we only get to watch the Olympics every 2 years. And it is such a special treat for me. I love watching the Olympics. But this is a very different Olympic race than the one that we're probably used to watching if you watch the Olympics now. This book was written and illustrated by Meghan McCarthy, and we'd like to thank the publisher, Simon Schuster, for giving us permission to share it with you today. So let's jump right in to The Wildest Race Ever. The first Olympic marathon held in America happened on August 30th, 1904, in St. Louis, Missouri. It was part of the World's Fair exhibition. At the World's Fair, many people experienced their first hot dog, first Dr. Pepper, first ice cream cone, and first Olympics. Severe rainstorms rolled in several days before the race. A local newspaper reported, "An automobile party went over the route yesterday, and the roads were found to be almost entirely washed away." Officials mapped out a new course. Unfortunately, the new course was more difficult. Although 41 runners had signed up to run, only 32 started on the day of the race. These are some of the runners: Fred Lors, an American; Felix Carvajal, a Cuban; John Lorden, an American; Sam Mallour, an American; Arthur Newton, an American; Albert Corey, a Frenchman; William Garcia, an American; Jan Massiani and Len Tau, South Africans; and Thomas Hicks, an American born in England. There were 11 additional runners from the United States, including the first American Indian to run in the Olympic Games, who was from the Seneca Nation. There was also another South African, a runner from Newfoundland, now part of Canada, and 9 representing Greece. People weren't sure who would win. It was 90 degrees out on the day of the 24.85-mile marathon. Marathons today are 26.2 miles. Thousands of people sat on risers while anxiously awaiting the start of the race. The runners put one foot forward in ready position. Was anyone nervous? Were they ready to run? "Gentlemen, I wish you a speedy journey, and may the best man win," announced the president of the fair. The runners were packed tightly at the starting line, waiting for the starting pistol to fire. It was a bit past 3 in the afternoon when, pow, the gun went off and the race was on. The runners rounded the stadium. Some ran harder than others. Marathons were invented in ancient Greece, but the Greek runners did not amaze spectators on this particular day. The 9 men ran bunched, and with great shocks of curly hair, wrote one reporter, and were more interested in personal appearance than covering ground. One runner who was interested in covering ground was American Fred Lors. He took off like a bullet and was in first place. After lapping 5 times around the stadium, the runners hit the hilly dirt road. Race judges, doctors, and reporters followed in cars. Bicycles also followed. All the wheels spinning around and around in the dirt sent dust clouds into the air. The runners could hardly breathe. Even though John Lorden was a champion in Boston, he was not looking like one in St. Louis. He began vomiting in the first mile. It was a sweltering hot day, and water was only offered to the runners from a water tower at mile 6 and from a well at mile 12. Some of the lucky runners had a trainer follow them by car with something to eat and drink, but many didn't. What's worse was that the contaminated water made some of the runners ill. 2 miles into the race, Americans, including Sam Mallour and Fred Lors, were fighting for position. Lorden got cramps and was out of the race. Thomas Hicks was somewhat behind, but continued to chug along. At about mile 9, Lors was overcome with cramps. He stopped running, got into an automobile, and drove off. Was that the end of Lors? Albert Corey and William Garcia were neck and neck. Although Hicks had been behind, he was catching up. The streets were inches deep in dust, Hicks' trainer remarked, and every time an auto passed, it raised enough dust to obscure the vision of the runners and choke them. Felix Carvajal ran tirelessly, until, of course, he didn't. Anytime people cheered for the 5-foot-tall Cuban, he jogged up to them and chatted, wishing to practice his English. Then he tipped his hat good day. This slowed him down by a lot. When Carvajal spotted men eating peaches in an automobile, he couldn't resist temptation. After they refused to give him the peaches, he snatched a few playfully, as one reporter described, and ran on, eating them as he went. 2 other men took the lead, Arthur Newton and Malheur. But not for long. Soon Malheur began to walk. Hicks finally caught up and joined Newton in the lead. Then Malheur began running again and passed Newton and Hicks. Who would win? It was Malheur, then Newton, then Hicks. The race was on. Meanwhile, South African Len Tau lost much time when he was chased a mile off course by an angry dog. Meanwhile, Carvajal had been making good time, despite wearing street clothes, and despite the fact that he kept pausing to chat with passers-by to practice his English. His downfall, however, say some accounts, was when he came upon an apple orchard. He couldn't help but stop to eat some delicious, juicy apples. He was hungry. Meanwhile, Malheur was in the lead, but was experiencing severe cramping. He was running slower and slower and slower. The other men were gaining. Malheur slowed to a walk. He, too, was out of the race. Hicks was still going, but by mile 10 he was begging for water. His trainers refused to give him any. Instead, they gave him strychnine. Strychnine is a kind of rat poison. It was the early 1900s, and science wasn't as advanced. Hicks' trainers thought giving him this was a good thing to do. They thought it would make him run faster. The trainers combined the rat poison with an egg white. What an odd combination. Would this help Hicks or hurt him? Meanwhile, a doctor who was driving alongside the racers to help those in need of a medical attention soon found himself in need of his own. His automobile plummeted down a 30-foot embankment. The doctor and another man inside the auto were rescued and taken to the hospital. Newspapers reported that the men would survive. Meanwhile, Lors appeared out of the dust. He'd passed Hicks and the other runners. It was reported that Lors ran the last lap of the track like a steam engine. He flew through the tape and was declared the winner. An American has won, people shouted. The crowd roared. Just then, someone demanded that the ceremony be stopped. Lors cheated. The crowd went from cheers to boos. Lors claimed that it was a joke. He said he was feeling better, so he ran the rest of the way. The race committee said this was unacceptable and decided to ban Lors for life from competing. Meanwhile, Hicks was struggling. He was only 2 miles from the finish when he came upon a large hill. He began to walk. Just as soon as he did, cheers from the crowd sounded. This perked Hicks up. He began to run once more. Perhaps there was hope. His trainers gave him another mixture of strychnine and an egg white. Over the last 2 miles of the road, wrote his trainer Charles Lucas, Hicks was running mechanically. His arms appeared as weights well tied down. He could scarcely lift his legs. Do you think giving Hicks more strychnine was a good idea? Things got worse for Hicks. He thought he had 20 miles to go instead of a mile. Perhaps it was the poison. He began begging for food and water and then to lie down. When a reporter asked how he was doing, he stated, "I want something to eat as soon as I get there. I'm nearly starved." Hicks asked for water, but was given a warm sponge bath instead. When Hicks crested the hill, the crowd shouted, "Who is he? Who is he?" "Hicks of Cambridge! An American! An American!" As Hicks entered the stadium and heard the cheers, he began to run faster. He pushed as hard as he could, faster and faster, until he broke through the tape. The winner! His time was 3 hours, 28 minutes, 53 seconds. Then Hicks collapsed. Hicks had put in such an effort that he was too weak to stand up and accept his award. Men carried him into the medical tent for examination. He had lost 8 pounds, running what would soon after be called the Killer Marathon. Meanwhile, 6 minutes after Hicks had finished, Corey, the Frenchman, came bouncing in. "The distance was too short for me. I would have preferred to run 10 miles longer," he happily told a reporter. Newton crossed the finish line in 3rd place. The 4th man to arrive was the Cuban, Carvajal. The St. Louis Post-Dispatch wrote, "When he found out he had lost, he wept like a child." Len Tao finished 9th. Considering that he was chased off course by a dog, this is quite impressive. His teammate, Jan Masciani, wasn't far behind, finishing 12th. William Garcia had breathed in too much street dust and was found by the roadside long after the sun had set. He was rushed to the hospital with not a minute to lose. An hour after his win, Hicks was well enough to pose for photos. He claimed he would not run again. But, like all good long-distance runners who are compelled to keep running, Hicks did the same. Even Lors got another crack at it. He ran the Boston Marathon a year later, in 1905, and finished in 1st place. No cheating involved. Every runner in the 1904 marathon accomplished something huge. They weren't afraid to attempt a long and almost impossible run. They all ran side by side, competitors from different parts of the globe. That's what the Olympics and marathon running is all about. The end. So that was a true story, believe it or not. This is a nonfiction book that actually happened in the 1904 Olympic Marathon. Wasn't that a crazy story? And this, like all good nonfiction books, has some great information in the back here if you want to learn more about the race and about the World's Fair as well, where it took place. There's also a great picture. I'm going to put this way up so maybe you can see it right there. That's a great picture of the winner of the race. Remember what happened to him. He was the one who took strychnine as he was going through the race, right? And almost didn't finish. And you can see in that picture just how bad he looks. He is so white. I can't believe that he even finished that race. So, it was such an interesting book for me to read and reminds me so much of all of the great events that you can watch in the Olympics. And I thought it would be fun if we could come up with some Olympics that we could do at home, right? Just things that you can do with your family or maybe the friends that you have in your neighborhood. So what can we do? So the easiest thing we can do is we can run a race, right? Just like our characters in our book here. I don't know that I would start with a marathon. Remember how long a marathon is? That's way too long, right? You don't want to run a marathon yet. It takes years and years to train to run a marathon. But you could run a longer race, maybe around your neighborhood, maybe the block around your neighborhood, or maybe in a local park. You could set up a course and you could run a race, a longer race. There's also a thing called relay races. Now, a relay race is when one person runs part of the race and then hands off something to somebody else who runs another part of the race. There could be up to 4 people in the Olympics running a race together, running a relay race together. That's another great thing that you could do. You could have a team running together, and maybe you're handing off a baton, which is a kind of a stick that they hand off to one another. Or you might have been in a race where you were passing like an egg on a spoon, or you were passing a balloon, or you were passing all kinds of wonderful things that you can do. That's a great another race that you can do at home. So those are things that you can do really easily. But there are also some other great track and field events that you can do that take just a little bit of preparation, a little bit of materials from your house. So I'm going to go grab some stuff. I'll be right back. All right, welcome back. So the first event that I want to talk about that you can have a simulated event at home is called the shot put. Now, shot put, you take a metal ball and you have to, well, it's not really throwing it. You don't want to throw it. They call it putting it. And the way that you do that is you hold the ball up here by your ear and you have to sort of push it away from you and get it to go as far as you can. But the metal ball that the men use is 16 pounds, which just with one hand, it's like a big bowling ball, except it fits in the palm of your hand, but it weighs as much as a big bowling ball. For women, they use almost a 9-pound ball. But you put it up by your ear, and you have to try to push it away as hard as you can. Now, to do this, they can only be in a 7-foot circle, and they'll usually spin around, because you think about the energy that you can build up as you're spinning around, in control though, of course, and then you want to try to push that ball away from you as fast and as hard as you can. So we can do something a little bit like that. We don't want to be throwing 16-pound balls around because we don't want anybody to get hurt. But we can make our own little metal shot put. I have some aluminum foil here, and I'm going to take off a couple of pieces, and I'm going to make it into a ball. Now, what you probably want to do is start with a ball and then maybe put a couple of pieces around it, sort of build up your shot put here. So we'll get another piece, put it around like that, make a bigger ball. Maybe one more, so we can make it a little bit close to the size of my hand here. Nope, get one more piece of ball. That, a little bigger ball. Oh, that's perfect. Okay, so we're going to take my shot put and try to push it away from me and see how far I can throw it, how far I can put it away from me. The record was over 22 meters, so that's a long way. You'll have to measure that out and see if you can get it as far as that. You can try to spin around and throw it too. Now, of course, be careful when you're doing all of this, especially if you're inside. Make sure that you don't have any furniture around you. Make sure you're not going to fall and hurt yourself, and get your grown-ups permission to use all these supplies too. Okay, so there's our shot put. So that's one thing that we can do. We can also do something called a discus. Now, a discus looks a little bit like a frisbee kind of, except that it's much, much heavier. So the men's weighs about 4.5 pounds. The women's weighs about 2 pounds. But it looks something like a frisbee. It's kind of flat. Now you can make your own. If you have a frisbee, you can use a frisbee. If you don't have a frisbee, you can make your own. Now, this is just a couple of plates, kind of heavier plates. You don't want to use the lightest plate to have. These are a little bit heavier plates. So I'm just going to put them together with the bottoms on the outside. So I make something that looks a little bit like a spaceship. Woo. And I'm just going to tape it together. Doesn't take a lot of tape. Any kind of tape will do. Just kind of a couple of spots around it, like that. Tape it like this. Now with a discus, it's the same thing. You have a very small circle that you have to throw from, and you'll see that people will circle around just like they do with the discus to try to build up that energy, that energy that they can then put into their throw. And to do the discus, you want to hold it underneath like that. It's a little bit different than how we throw a frisbee. We throw a frisbee usually like this, but you can't throw something with just your wrist if it's as heavy as that. So they have to use their whole arm. You have to spin around and then try to throw it and see how far you can get it. That's another thing to do. That's probably an outside activity. It's probably, unless you have a really big room in your house, like a basement or something, you probably want to do this one outside. The record is about 70 meters, which is a very, very long way away. So there's another one you can do. Spin around and try to fling that discus and see how far you can get it. Lots of fun, huh? Okay, another one is a hammer throw. And the hammer throw is a very interesting one. It's kind of like the shot put, except instead of putting it up here in your hand and throwing it, it is on a rope. It's something very heavy. Again, the men's is about 16 pounds and the women's is almost 9 pounds. But it's a big, heavy ball on a long rope that you have to try to throw as far as you can. So, to make ours, I have this little bag. I looked around my house. I was lucky. I found a bag. This is a bag that a game was in, a little game that you can play. So I'm just going to borrow this for a little bit to try this. If you don't have that, a paper sack would work, like a lunch bag that you might put a paper bag lunch in. A plastic bag even would work too. But this one is nice because it's a little bit heavier. So if you have something like that, that would work great. So we're going to make this into our hammer throw by filling it just with some newspaper. So I'm going to ball up some newspaper here. You can make it as big or as small as you want. If you're going to be outside and you make sure that there's nobody around you, you could put something a little bit heavier in the bottom of it, maybe a ball or something like that to weigh it down a bit. If you're going to be inside, then let's just stick with the newspaper, huh? Because you don't want to hurt anything. You don't want to break anything. All right, so we're going to get our newspaper like that. Maybe one more. Newspaper. There we go. Okay, and I got super lucky because look, my bag already has this great string on it. So if yours doesn't, then you're going to need to tie your bag at the top and then get a piece of string that you can put on it. Just tie a piece of string around the top of your bag and then have something to the other end to hold on to. But mine already has that string, so I was pretty lucky. If you can find a bag like this, you're pretty lucky. All right, so to throw this one, I'm going to hold on to just this part and then swing it around. And when it's going the direction that I want it to go, then I'm going to let it go. So that's another one that we're spinning around and using that kinetic energy, that energy that we get just by spinning around to then let it go. And that's what's going to make it fly very, very far away. The world records are almost 90 meters. So over 80 meters and 90 meters. And that is a very, very long way away. Again, get out your tape measure at home and see if you can measure the spot that you are and compare it to what those world records are. Okay, so the hammer throw like that. Whew, don't swing it around your head. It's two-handed. You're going to turn around with it like that. Okay? All right. So one more, and that is the javelin. The javelin is really cool. The javelin is a long, it almost looks like a spear, and you throw it with one hand, and you have to try to get it to throw as far as you can. So the ones that the Olympic athletes use are 3 meters long and weigh lots and lots of weight, but we don't want to do anything like that here because that could be very dangerous, couldn't it? But we can make our own little version of a javelin just with some straws. So these are some reusable straws that I have here at home. You could use some straws here that you left over from last time you went out to eat. And we're just going to tape them together. You can do as many straws as you want. I wouldn't do any more than about 4. I'm going to do 3 today. But you can experiment and see what works the best. There's a lot of science that goes into Olympic athletes now, not just in the way that they train, but in the equipment that they use. So you can do some experimenting on your own too and see what works the best for you. Okay, so I've got those two together. Take this straw, we're going to put this one on the end, like this, and another tape right there. Javelins have to be thrown above your shoulder, and there's a line that you can't pass, so the athletes will run up with their javelins and then let them go, all right? So you can see how far you can throw this. You could also use a little bucket and try to aim at it. So you could have your bucket. Let me see if I can do this. I have my bucket over here, and let's see my bucket here, and see if I can hit the bucket. All right, that was pretty easy because it was pretty close. But what if you put that bucket across the room? Do you think that you could aim and hit the bucket with your javelin? I don't know. Maybe. It might be hard. I don't know that I can do it. But I bet with practice that you could. So there's another fun activity that you can do at home. Who can hit the bucket or who can throw it the farthest? So I hope that you got some great ideas of things that you can do to celebrate the Olympics. I hope that you enjoy watching them next time that they come around too. I bet there's lots of other ideas that you can do too. So use your imagination. So thank you so much for joining us today for It's Elementary. I hope that you keep an eye on all of Calvert Library's social media feeds so that you can see all of the wonderful programs that we have for all ages. Thanks so much. We'll see you soon. Bye-bye.